Okay, amazing. So thank you so much for joining us for the launch of The House with Two Letterboxes by Janet H. Swinney. Going to model this for you. So it's officially launched tomorrow, but we're having a secret early party for everyone this evening. You can hear my voice on catch up. Thank you so much for celebrating Janet's book this evening. It's actually her second collection because she's extremely accomplished. So I'll tell you a little bit about her before we kick off the evening, and then I'll tell you a little bit about how we're going to do the launch. So Janet H. Swinney was born and grew up in the northeast of England, where the stories in this book are set. And that was when soot, formica and winkle pickers were all the rage. And she says when it was actually compulsory to smoke on buses, and packets of crisps used to have the blue twists of salt inside them. And she spent many years oscillating between Scotland, where she felt more comfortable culturally and politically, and the southeast of England. And she now lives in London. And she worked for many years in post-16 education, but she's always felt compelled to write. And now writing is her top priority. And her work has been published in many journals in the UK, India, and the USA, and has been listed in many competitions ranging from Fish to Fabula, and including the Commonwealth Writers' Prize. And I could list so many more, but that is a really good overview. So this evening, we are going to have some clips from a film that was created to celebrate the 150 years of Durham Miners Association and the gala that they had. And people that have already seen the film, we're just going to show a clip. And if you haven't seen the whole film, then there is a link in the chat, and I'll repost that later as well. But before I show you that, I would like to kick us off with a question. For those of you who have not read any stories from the collection, I wanted to ask Janet, when she was writing this book, Janet, did you have a particular theme in mind, and did you fit stories in based on an overall arching theme that you wanted to write about? Or was it that you found you were writing on a theme repeatedly and then you brought those stories together into a collection? So how did that start coming about? So I'll just, if you can unmute yourself, Janet, or I can do that for you.
Okay.
Oh, you got it, yeah.
The latter, really. Stories come when they come, so I can't tell what they're going to be about. I can't write to order. So the stories in this collection span a considerable number of writing years, actually. And what happened was that one of my writing friends, who's online right now, Selma, suggested to me that some of my work might be a good fit for Fly on the Wall. So I had a look, and what appealed to me was the strapline that you have, which is a publisher with a conscience. And I thought, right, this does look my sort of thing. So I put together a number of stories that, that to me fit within that framework and happen all to be located in the northeast of England. And I really need to thank you at this point for accepting my work and for doing a very good job promoting it, for which I'm extremely grateful. So I think, initially looking through the collection that you first accepted, it was clear that there was an emphasis on poverty and how it curtails people's life chances, and the challenges that being born and brought up in certain circumstances creates. And the question is then, well, what do you do? How do you respond in that type of environment? What can you make of it? So I would say that the first story, Black Boy Winning, the one that where we're going to show the clip, actually illustrates that, because it's about the relationship between a father and a son in a mining community. And the father never wanted to be a miner in the first place, but is forced into the situation. And now he vents his frustration and his anger on his family. And we see there are two stories woven together, his and one of his sons. And the son longs to be freed from the tyranny of the father, really. So it's a question of which of them, if either of them, will realize their aspiration to be free.
And I should say as well that through Janet's pure tenacity, the actors in this film are James Bolam and Susan Jameson. And Janet really wanted someone who would embody that, the themes of the collection and be sort of right for the time. And so I think, yeah, she's definitely excelled herself there. And I know she had many a sleepless night trying to find the right actors for this. So I hope you enjoy it. And I'm going to put the full link in the chat for those of you that haven't seen it. So I'm going to share my screen and everyone wish me luck that it will work. I'll do a test and then someone, probably Janet, shout out to me if you can hear the sound, and then if it does, I'll shut up. You hear it, Janet?
No.
You hear it? Perfect.
Yes.
Joe wriggled further into an uncomfortable corner of the kitchen. He hated every aspect of this carry-on. His da had been drinking since morning, draining bottles of stout he'd brought from the celly out. He had their mam pinned against the dresser, one hand at her throat, the other curled in a fist and in the middle of repeated action. He'd already made short shrift of the kidney pie their mam had intended for their tea. Lumps of meat were stuck to the oven door like snails, oozing trails of gravy, while shards of oven dish lay behind the fender. Their mam's back was arched awkwardly, her skirt drawn up, exposing sinews better suited to nights in the dance hall than days doing the housework. The crockery on the dresser rattled. The cups swung on their hooks. "Stairs!" their mam yelled between blows. The girls jumped down from the table. William, who'd been trying to have a bath all afternoon, rushed through from the scullery, his braces still dangling. Joe extracted himself from his corner, and the four of them shot up the wooden staircase like bullets from the breech. Without pausing for thought, William prized up the sash of the bedroom window, hitched up his braces, slithered down the shingles, dropped down into the garden, and was off. The girls huddled on their bed in the corner of the room. Joe drew down the sash and sat on the boys' bed, watching his older brother's rapid retreat. Over the hedge and into the rough, where an idling pitbeck was lost in a wraith of mist. He wished he had the courage to join him. As darkness descended on the few broken lines of houses that constituted their village, a crescent moon presented itself above a bank of clouds. Joe watched its steady sojourn across the window pane, his mind wandering far away, till at last the subterranean breath of the burn, seeping through the frame, chilled him to the marrow. He shuffled under the eiderdown and fell stiffly asleep.
Lovely.
Yeah, so what I was going to say was, so although initially, when the collection was submitted, the predominant theme was about poverty and how, we all like to think that we're unique, which to a certain extent we are, but our lives are shaped by social and environmental and geographical conditions. But when you and I, Isabel, talked about it, we began to realize that there was another theme in here as well, which is about gender-based violence. And if you'll notice in that first clip, that, we're seeing it from the little boy's point of view, but it's the woman who's the incidental punch bag. And we can guess that she's been the incidental punch bag on more than one occasion. So on that basis, when we thought about it some more, I realized I had more work that actually related to this theme. So Isabel kindly allowed me to submit additional material. And I don't know whether it resonates with you, but I think, well, as a woman, I think about throughout your life in different ways. You have to, you become aware of the threat from the male half of the species, actually, that you're always on the qui vive about why is that man looking at me like that, or what was that strange incident I just experienced. So women have to manage themselves, girls and women have to manage themselves in the world in a way that men don't. So I think if you read the full collection, you'll see that there's evidence of that in the stories at different stages in girls' and women's lives.
I think probably, even though I don't think it's your next reading, the most potent one on that theme, when Sarah Everard was the news story and we were talking about this theme, I remember we added in the shortest story in the collection, One for the Off. And for that, to me, is, it's short but haunting, definitely not sweet. But yeah, for me, I think if people read that one, they'll sort of know that's like the heart of what you're exploring with the gender violence and how ingrained it can be into someone's life. So on that cheerful note, Janet, what story are you going to kick us off with today for your first reading?
Okay, well, I'm going to read from Tenterhooks. There is that issue in there as well, but that's not the main thrust of the story. The central character is a man called Norman, and again, it's mining community, but Norman is out of work, and he's a severely disabled man with acute health problems, and this has left him with a dramatically horrible appearance, and his appearance is the source of rumor and suspicion among some of his neighbors, to the point where a lot of them won't actually speak to him. But Norman lived next door to a young couple, Bernadette and Brendan, and they have a number of small children. And the couple find themselves with a problem that they can't resolve on their own. And Norman decides to help them. So the story is really about generosity, how generous people can be when really they're on their uppers. And it's also about resourcefulness, how people can marshal all kinds of skills to be able to do something constructive in life despite the odds. So I have to weave about a bit in the story here for it to make sense to you. But I'll start at the beginning, and I've just got to get my voice right for this. Okay, I've got to move from London to the northeast. The folks next door had had a fight the night before. Norman had been able to hear nearly everything and infer the rest. Not that the walls were paper thin, but the chimney flues in their adjoining kitchens merged, somewhere above their respective mantelpieces. And as it was summer, and the fires weren't lit, there was little to muffle the sound from the neighbouring house. The row had gone on for a good couple of hours, but that, Norman suspected, wasn't when the trouble had started. So what's happened is that Bridget's sister has turned up from a rather swanky part of Newcastle in a car, which is like unheard of in the neighbourhood, and has come to invite them to her high-end wedding. And after she's departed, a row breaks out between Brendan and Bridget. Bridget wants to go, obviously, but they can't afford to go. So the row, it's not just Norman he's overheard more of the detail, but it hasn't passed unnoticed elsewhere. And the following morning, there are neighbours out on the other side of the street. There was something up there last night, said Mrs. Leggett, nodding at the houses opposite. She'd done her washing early. The clothes were already on the line, and she had her hat and scarf on ready to go out. "Oh," said Blanche, who was standing on the step next door, nursing her newborn baby. "Oh, yes. Our Sidney said when he came down the road from his sister's, you could hear voices raised." Blanche suppressed her thoughts about whether a man who went out late on a Sunday evening was indeed visiting his sisters. "It'd be to do with the folks who were there in the afternoon, I'll bet," she continued, wrestling the baby, who was the size of a small prize fighter, about her chest. "That was our parents and her younger sister," said Mrs. Leggett, folding her arms and settling in for a lengthy discussion. "They're from somewhere for by the town moor, I believe. He has a job as a manager in the yards, our Sidney says. It was a big come down for them when their Bridget ended up with him. But then she was no better than she ought to be." Blanche nodded. Everybody knew that Bridget had fallen pregnant by Brendan before they were married. But there was no harm in airing a well-known truth once again. "I wonder what they wanted," Blanche said. Further speculation was halted when the door opposite opened and Bridget shot out with a scarf tied over her hair. "That'll be her off to work." "Good morning, Bridget," Mrs. Leggett shouted. Bridget glanced quickly in their direction. "Morning," she called, and skedaddled off down the street. "Hey, did you see that?" "What?" said Blanche. The baby was proving to be entirely uncooperative. "If I'm not mistaken, he's given her a bonny good clip." "Has he?" "Aye, she's got the scarf on to try and cover it up." "Eee," said Blanche, "and her with another one on the way as well." "What can you expect?" spat Mrs. Leggett. "Catholics." Before she could go further, the door next to the McTierneys opened. Norman rolled down his path and out onto the pavement. He saw the two women on their steps and saw that they saw him. In the past, he would have been inclined to shout a greeting, but not anymore. These days, there were few people who wished to speak to him, and that included people he'd known all his life. The two women watched in silence as he made off down the street, his hands thrusting at the levers of his invalid carriage. Mind, look at the state of him," said Mrs. Leggett, once he was out of earshot. So Norman goes off down the road to the co-op and buys a few groceries and the newspaper. And meanwhile, as he hefts himself back up the hill with the levers, Mamie from down the street was waiting for Norman when he got back to the house. It was some palaver getting him back indoors and into his wheelchair. Norman paid her £5 a week to help him with such manoeuvrings. She was one of the few people who seemed to be completely unconcerned by his appearance. She put away his shopping, got him settled by the kitchen table, and made him an early dinner of bubble and squeak. She plunked the plate and the ketchup bottle on the table in front of him. "There you are, Norm," she said cheerfully. "Get that down you." As she leaned over him, Norman could peer down her cleavage, and when she stretched out her arm to bring the teapot closer, a waft of wild garlic sprang out from the dark thicket that thrived under her arm. He steadied himself. That's champion, Mamie. Just let's have the paper." She put the paper near his elbow and left him to it. He watched her amble down the path, her bra strap drooping over her shoulder. Mamie was generally judged to be deficient in mental acuity and somewhat slatternly in conduct. She may or may not have left school, and it was doubtful what, if anything, she'd learned there. She would talk to anyone, anywhere, on terms of familiarity that were not always entirely appropriate. But she was of a practical bent, always making and mending. Even now, before she'd gone 5 steps, Norman could see her hands working away at something she'd drawn from her pocket. Norman took time with the paper. He liked to start with the sport, then the politics, then the local news. He saved the cartoons, the births, deaths and marriages and other stuff till last. It was well on in the afternoon by the time he reached the small ads, and the pot of tea on the table was now stone cold. Today, as he scanned the for sale columns with idle curiosity, something caught his attention. There were half a dozen similar items that their owners couldn't wait to be shot of. Obviously, a newfangled appliance that had been found wanting, or perhaps something that had seemed like a good idea at the time and then turned out to be too hard to handle for the person with no technical skill and even less patience. Norman fell into a reverie, wondering which it might be. An idea began to form slowly but clearly in his head. He opened a bottle of bitter to facilitate his musing. The next day it was raining, just a slight drizzle, but enough to make the air feel cooler. Norman sat by his open door waiting to get a glimpse of Brendan. At last he came out of his house. He was without a jacket, his shoulders hunched against the weather. "How?" said Norman. Brendan stopped in his tracks. He had no particular dislike of Norman, but no particular interest in him either. "How?" he said suspiciously. He wasn't used to being spoken to since his grave misdemeanor. I'm not going to tell you what the grave misdemeanor is. He was persona non grata wherever he went. Norman gestured to him to come closer to the fence and then confided his idea. "But," said Brendan. "Why not?" said Norman. "But the point is," said Brendan. "Look," said Norman, "all you've got to do is this." He lowered his voice still further. "Can you do that?" Brendan nodded. "Never a word, then." "Never a word." That same day, Norman broached the matter with Mamie. There were certain things he would need her to do. She nodded her agreement, and he pressed a letter into her hand for posting. It was stuffed with cash from his bedside drawer. "Didn't ye crack a light, mind?" he said. "I'll win it. I'll win it." She smiled vacuously, in a way that immediately made Norman doubt her reliability.
I love Norman. He's very likable, and no one seems to get his heart in the story, which is fully revealed later on. He's got a big heart. And also people will have picked up in that extract how much dialect that you've put in there, Janet. And I think it probably came naturally to you because obviously you've grown up hearing people talk in this way. But I wonder if you didn't include it, and if it wasn't natural for you to infuse it through, what do you think we would lose by not having that?
Oh, okay, that's a question about negative space. I can't even imagine that because I've yeah, that's like an Anthony Gormley question.
Oh, sorry.
Anybody who is familiar with my work knows that I've always been interested in language variety, whether it's, you know, across generations or across places, or whether it's to do with particular professions and subcultures and the different forms of language they've either inherited or developed. And what I clearly remember from my upbringing is in my family, each generation spoke differently. So, and it's well known sociologically that women are the upwardly mobile moderators and controllers of language in their families. So my mother, for example, would make fun of the way my grandfather spoke. And at the same time, she had me on short order in terms of trying to speak standard English, although she didn't speak it herself. So I think a lot of kids from communities like mine would know very clearly, if not from their family, then from school, that either you had to try and model standard English or you failed educationally. So some people like me tried, and other people just thought, sod it, I'm not doing it. So I really wanted to convey in these stories how language does change generation by generation. And you know, it was completely liberating for me to move to Scotland and find that the way my grandfather spoke was in fact related to Scots, or to go to the Netherlands and find that many of our dialect words were actually bona fide Dutch words. So I've always been interested in that, but then the challenge is, how do you represent that using standard English orthography? And my reading of other people suggests that not always successful. So I used to struggle with Thomas Hardy, for example. You know, you have to do it in a way that the reader can get past the text and hear the voice. And I couldn't do that with Thomas Hardy. And then when I was living in Scotland, there was a lot of excitement when William McIlvenney and James Kelman came on the scene, because that's exactly what they were trying to do. They were trying to capture Lowland Scots using standard English for their, or using the standard English orthography to their ends. And I would say one of them was more successful than the other. I think Kelman was a lot more successful than McIlvenney. And the person who, for me, really managed to achieve that was Roddy Doyle in his book, Paddy Clark, Ha Ha Ha. Because when I read that book, I hear the voice, I'm with that person, I understand exactly where they are. So there are technical challenges in trying to do this, and you know, finding types of spelling that you think will work, not overcooking it, trying to be consistent. It's really quite challenging, but I've done my best to give it my best shot in this collection.
And on the note of giving ordinary people a voice and the way that they spoke, I think we're going to hear an extract that you think sort of encapsulates that the best.
Yeah, I should say as well that people are incredibly inventive in their own argot, and they're humorous in their own argot. It's not so easy to adopt somebody else's way of speaking and to be inventive and funny. So I'd like to think that there's some humour in this book as well. So I'm going to read from The Army on the Move. Again, small village setting. I don't know how many people are familiar with the church army these days, but they were a sort of proselytizing branch of the Anglican or the Church of England, Protestant proselytizers who camped around the countryside in uniforms like the Sally Army, trying to appeal to the masses in the way that, you know, the rather forlorn Church of England couldn't. So the Church of Army washes up. Sorry, the church army washes up in this village, and this story is told from the point of view of a teenager. She and her friend, not unlike myself, are in a church choir, and afterwards they hang about in their friend's village shop, after every service where there's much chit chat. And the woman who runs the village shop and her sister, they've invited the church army to come and hold a house meeting at their house, to which the two girls are invited. Oh. If Dave Hallett's still online, he's the person who prompted me to write this, actually. So I hope it's up to the mark, Dave. Untypically, wait a bit, I've got to get the voice right again. Untypically, me and Pam are a bit early. Belle, that's one of the women who runs the shop, is busy making egg and salad cream sandwiches at the kitchen table. A piebald cat crouches at the centre of the table, winking sleepily. This is Puddles. Belle lifts Puddles' hindquarters, revealing the butter dish. She scrapes her knife across the pat of butter within, drops the cat's rear, and then steadily continues spreading slices of mother's pride. Nan, who runs the shop, is at the fireplace. She hefts up the coal scuttle, pivots on her good leg like a shot putter, and slings a load of coal into the grate. Then she has a good prod around with the poker. The smoke starts to swirl up the chimney. That should do us for a bit, she says. The door from the hall opens. In comes old Tot, or old Sot as me and Pam call him, Nan's da and Belle's father-in-law. He's wearing a soiled overcoat and a few days' worth of white whiskers. He glowers round the room as though he's spoiling for a fight. Sheba, his Alsatian dog, is glued to his car. "No, you," Nan yells, "get your cap on. It's cold out, and take the dog with you." I breathe a sigh of relief. Me and Sheba are not on good terms. "And mind," Nan continues, "if you are going out through the shop, you're not to take any bottles of Guinness off the shelf. There'll be plenty of that at the club." Old Sot growls and makes his filthy exit with the dog. By the time we're assembled, there's 10 of us parishioners. Mrs. Maynard from off the estate, Mr. Hardy, the church warden, 2 of the lads from the choir, Jimmy Tate, who can't sing a note in tune but is very keen on getting his tongue round us lasses' tonsils at every opportunity, and Spuggy Bird, once a great boy treble whose voice has become unreliable over the last year. Then Eric, the street sweeper, a Pentecostalist who's washed up at Bible study when the church was in its ecumenical phase. Plus Pam and me, Belle and Nan, and Puddles, of course. We arrange ourselves round the fireplace on the three-piece suite in an assortment of kitchen chairs. The two Church Army officers hover, one on either side of the hearth. They look absolute quacks in grey uniforms, complete with bus conductors' caps. "Hey, mind you've got it really nice in here for Christmas," says Mrs. Maynard, trying to take the awkward edge off things. She's referring to the whopping great Christmas tree standing in the corner, weighed down with tinsel and fairy lights. "Oh, aye," says Nan. "We're putting it up early to brighten things up a bit." "Shall we get started?" says one of the Church Army fellas. "I'm Mike." Mike has horrible horn-rimmed spectacles that make him look as though he's viewing you from several fields away. This is Brian. The pair of them take off their caps to reveal skulls on which the barber has barely left a haircut. Ham and me widen our eyes at each other in distaste. "Now let's join our hands in prayer." We clasp our hands to our respective chests. No, I mean, let's take each other's hands as a sign of our fellowship in the Lord. Across the room, I see Jimmy Tate's eyes flash, but unfortunately for him, he's stuck between Mr. Hardy and Spuggy. Tentatively, we clutch each other's hands. "Let's pray that the Lord will bless our activities this evening, send down his grace upon us, and open our hearts to his holy word. Amen." "Amen," we murmur. Mike kicks off with the question. "Now, what does Advent mean?" We look uncomfortably at our feet. We're Anglicans. We're not used to questions, just as we're not used to holding hands. "To come?" I venture, and immediately flush with embarrassment. "Arrival," says Mr. Hardy. "Whose arrival?" "Christ, of course," says Mr. Hardy. "Exactly," says Mike. "I never knew that," says Mrs. Maynard. Puddles grabs the back leg of the settee and starts working at it with her claws. "Remember what John the Baptist said, Brian?" Brian begins to read as though he's just learned how to do it. "I baptize you with water for repentance, but the one who comes after me is mightier than I, and I am not fit to take off his shoes." Matthew 3:11 and 12. "What translation is that?" says Mr. Hardy. "The New English Bible," says Brian, "because I prefer the Revised Standard Version myself." "Because they wouldn't have had shoes," says Eric. "What?" says Mike. "In them countries they wouldn't have had shoes, they'd have had sandals, if you want to be authentic, like." Mike's lips tighten. Puddles jumps up on the back of the settee and stalks along it. "The point I'm making," Mike glares at Eric witheringly, "is that at this important time of the year, we should get ready to welcome the Lord Jesus Christ into our lives. Just as John prepared the way for the Lord, so must we." Puddles settles down, dangling her tail over Mrs. Maynard's shoulder. "And how do we do that?" "I don't know," says Nan. "Can you give us a clue?" "Do you mean buying Christmas presents and that?" asks Spug. "We must repent our sins," says Mike. "We must show that we are worthy to receive him." "I thought Jesus was with us all the time." "Why?" says Eric. "He is, yes, but we celebrate Christmas as a reminder of that first coming. We must ask for his blessing to keep us free from further error and wrongdoing." "Oh, I see," says Nan. "Why, yes," says Mrs. Maynard. "It's as plain as the nose on your face." Puddle stands up and starts waggling her bottom. Brian is fingering the pages of his prayer book as though he's looking for a lost bus ticket. Mike continues. "Christmas also reminds us of the second coming, the day when Jesus will appear again in all his glory with the Father." Suddenly, Puddles launches herself off the back of the settee and lands foursquare in the middle of the hearthrug. Her sides convulse and she starts coughing. She huddles down close to the floor and shuffles slowly backwards. As she does so, a fully formed fish emerges head first from her mouth. Once the tail is out, she sniffs carefully with some bemusement at this artifact. There's a moment's silence. Then, "Why, that's the second coming, all right," shouts Spug.
Must be strange performing without applause at the end, Janet. So maybe we can all unmute and give you a round of applause.
Wonderful. Fantastic.
It's strange not being able to see people, actually.
Yeah. That was a wonderful reading, Janet. Thank you for bringing all the characters to life for us and making it Christmassy as well.
Yes. Yes.
So what we'd like to do now, everyone, is we're going to welcome questions from you, and you can either put them in the chat and we'll read them out to Janet for you, or you can just ask her directly. It depends how confident you're feeling. Either option is fine. But while you're having a little think, I wanted to ask Janet how your idea for because I know it's very close to your heart, how the idea of the film came about for the Durham Miners Association.
Okay. Well, as most ideas come, it came in the chair in the morning. I just read that it was the 150th anniversary of the Durham Miners Gala, or Gala, depends on how you say it. But they've not been able to celebrate it because of COVID. So, normally there are communities gather from all over the Northeast and beyond, and each one is usually led by a marching band, a brass band, or a silver band. And there are huge festivities in the streets of the city of Durham, and there are political speeches, left-wing political speeches, of course, from various well-known politicians. And it just seemed to me to be an absolute travesty for this 150th anniversary to go by and nothing to happen. And I thought, well, maybe there are alternative ways of having some sort of celebration. And then I thought, well, Black Boy Winning is a story that actually fits the bill here. So I spoke to I got started on it. I decided I was going to do it. I was going to make this film. And then I asked the Durham Miners Association if they would be willing to host it on their social media platforms, and they said yes. And they did, yeah. And I also asked them if they had any money, and they said no. So there we are. That's how that was made. How that came about.
And while people are thinking, Janet, because I'm sure some people here are writers and they might be short story writers. And I wondered that for you, from, say, the first story in this collection that was ever written, how long did it take you to bring these stories of the collection to fruition?
That's an impossible question to answer. The first one in the collection was written a lot earlier than the others. So I can't really say. It's a bit like either Rosie's knitting. When somebody asks you how long did it take you to knit that jumper, you've no blinking idea, because you go at it a bit at a time whenever you're in the mood, really. So difficult to say. And in between times I'd be writing stories set in India or elsewhere. So it's really difficult to quantify.
That's interesting that you can write in two locations with two dialects, and you don't have to work on one project, that you can go from one to the other and it still makes sense in that week or in that month to you.
It's actually the way I read as well. I found one of my problems with university education was that they expected you to read so you were in a narrow trough, just on the same subject continuously. And it wasn't until I did a management diploma, where I realized you could have several different piles of books on different subjects and just read across the top, across several disciplines. I find that far more productive than just, digging the same pit deeper, if you like. That just seems to be the way my brain works. So any questions incoming?
Maybe you can just say some words to inspire us to actually finish a manuscript, Janet, because I know that some writers, it's difficult to get to the final project. And I know that you're very good at entering competitions, getting the submissions in. And how do you sort of motivate yourself to do that? What would be your top tips for getting there?
I just think that you can't force ideas, actually, that they pop out like slices of toast out of the toaster, and you just have to have one eye on what competitions are open and think whether or not you've got something suitable for that. I can't write to order, I'm afraid, and I would be absolutely hopeless on any of these writers' workshops where they gave you a start and you had to finish, or threw a tipper onto the table in front of you and said, write about that. I can't do it. I have to understand something. A light bulb has to go on in my head about a situation or a person or a setting, and then I have to let that gestate for a while. Think about what the backstory is. Think about what the outcome is, and then by the time I sit down at the computer, it's more or less ready to write. And actually, yeah, I'm getting a little bit tired of competitions, because it's very difficult to determine what the criteria of any competition is. What the criteria are.
I like how you're self-editing yourself, Janet.
Yes,
well saved.
Don't do it down. The criteria is.
No, you're right. I mean, every judge is different, and how do you know what they're looking for? It's kind of a bit of a lottery, isn't it? Even if your writing is of a really high quality, it's not necessarily everyone's cup of tea.
Yes. You can't take it to the lengths of checking the form of the judges in the way that you would do if you were, a betting person. But actually, I think a lot of it is completely random. It's about luck.
Talking about random, Janet, this might be again that you sort of let ideas come to fruition when they do. But Olivia was wondering, now that writing is your main focus, do you have like a daily writing practice that you might do, or a weekly?
No, I'm not one of those people either. So I find that things go in cycles. So there can be a time when I'm quite prolific, and then a time that is just I'd rather do something else, make a few dresses or something, and then another time there's just a gestation period, and after that the writing will start. But I'm not one of these people either that thinks that you have to spend 8 hours a day in front of the laptop. I sit in front of the laptop when I'm ready to sit in front of the laptop. And actually, I was hearing another person being interviewed on the radio the other day, and I'm not going to be able to remember her name. She's very, 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 very prolific, and she's very funny, writes feminist stuff, at the top of all bestseller lists, Irish surname, can't remember. However, that's her approach. She said she has ideas lined up in a queue waiting to be written, but she doesn't sit down in front of the laptop until they're ripe for the picking.
I like that. And Emma's saying that she agrees that life and learning are not linear. And she says it's wonderful how you create both yearning, transgression, and loving humour in your work. So, what is your touchstone along the way? Maybe quite a hard question.
It is. Could you re-express it? Could you re-express the question? What she'd rather have?
What is your touchstone along the way? So it might be, Emma, do you mean what do you come back to maybe keep on track about character? Is it about character? Yearning, transgression, and loving humour. While Emma has a think about how to rephrase. Sorry, Emma, you're too intellectual for us. Marie's got a question for you.
Okay.
And she says, once you have an idea for a story, do you write several drafts and do you spend a lot of time editing what you've written?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, my practice has changed over the years. It's changed a lot. So I just used to write it out in one go. I had this idea about le mot juste, and I think if you thought hard enough about your choices of vocabulary, choices of phrase, and so on, there would be no need to go back and edit. I just used to write it all out, and whatever length it was, that was the length it was. But I can see that my practice has changed. So, for instance, I might submit the same story for 3 different competitions or 3 different journals, and the word limit might be different on all of them, and I would do some editing to make sure I could comply with the word limit. But I've also, I think I've refined my editing skills as well, because I can look back at a story now and sometimes strip out a couple of thousand words. Maybe out of an 18,000 word story, I'd strip out 2,000 or more as being superfluous. And really, it's about trying to see the text from the reader's point of view rather than your own. So things that might be dear to you might be peripheral, marginal to the reader.
And we've got a question from Olivia. What are you reading at the moment, which inspires you?
I've just read Erskine Caldwell's The Tobacco Road, and I hadn't realised that I was attracted by the title, and again, because it seemed to be about working class people, and I hadn't realised that I was venturing onto really an important aspect of American literary tradition. I didn't realize this writer was really well known. Cynthia there has put me right on that subject. And it was very, very interesting, because first of all, I started off thinking I was really enjoying it, and then I started to have, I thought they were wearing undertones. So basically, it's a total indictment of the life of sharecroppers in the southern states of America during the Depression, and how these people are living in abject poverty with, not a crust between them. So it's an indictment of capitalism, because they've been left high and dry, and the circumstances are terrible, and they can't do anything to ameliorate their situation. But what started to bother me was that, yes, the people were ignorant, i.e. uneducated, and basically they had no self-respect and no respect for anybody else, and no compassion. And I don't really think that is a totally, it's not a fully rounded view of what people are like, even when they're living in abject poverty. As I think I've tried to represent with that story Tenterhooks. And then I read, of course, that he and other people were interested in eugenics at the time. So the logical conclusion, I suppose, is wipe out the poor if you can't feed them. So that made me very, very nervous, actually. But I'd still recommend reading him because of the situation that he describes, and I've actually downloaded more of his books to read.
Interestingly, I think that by telling us what you're reading, you've somehow answered Emma's question, because she's clarified that she wants to know when you're writing, you're sort of balancing things. You've got rage, kindness, and respect, and that sort of delicate path of trying to communicate a community which predominantly lives in poverty. How do you present them fully and honestly?
I suppose, basically, I think about people that I have known or do know. I'm not saying that I literally make caricatures of people that I know, but to understand other people, you have to examine what's going on around you and the way people behave towards each other. I've certainly known people like Mrs. Leggett. They are a nightmare if you're living in a village. And I've certainly known people like Norm. But the Norm that I knew may not have had the physical characteristics of Norm in the story.
I like that. Yeah, we're always probably stealing as writers, aren't we? Just little snippets of people that we find and putting them into our writing to make it authentic.
Yes, but I want to say that the trigger for a story is not always a character. It can sometimes be a place. I can remember, for example, I used to live in Essex, and one of my students used to say, Tilbury is the arsehole of England and Chelmsford is 30 miles up it. And I didn't live very far from Tilbury, so it wasn't the most attractive place to be. And on the journey into town on the train, we used to go past the old Fords of Dagenham factory. And there was a huge plant there. Now, I have to mention at this point that I used to teach adults reading and writing. And somebody had been given the job of stenciling no parking on the numerous bays of this factory all the way along the wall. So think about the number of N's in no parking. And this person was suffering from letter N reversal. So they stenciled all the N's back to front. And every time I went past this, I used to think, was this an act of subversion? Or did they really have, some problem with spelling and writing? Anyway, that started a whole thing off in my head. And I wrote quite a long story which featured Dagenham Dock. But in the end, this goes back to the editing point, the character with the letter N reversal and even the no parking signs disappeared. So the place was the trigger, the story evolved, then the original trigger was dumped.
Thank you so much for being so open about your influences in the process, Janet. I think it's been really interesting to hear about the ins and outs and what inspires you. And we've got some new reading for our list as well as your book. We can also read what you're reading now, which is great. I'm going to put all the links in the chat, guys. So we've got an audio bit, which is new for us. So we've got a great actress called Hannah Stone who's performing. Hannah Wood, even. I do know a Hannah Stone, but she's not the Hannah Wood. She's
Hannah Paper Scissors.
Obviously, we got the paperback, and if you grab the paperback this month, then you're going to get a short story pamphlet as well. So you're getting a nice freebie in the spirit of Christmas. We've also got the ebook, and I'm going to put the YouTube link as well. So if you've not seen the film, go and see it, because it represents a lot of hard work on Janet's behalf, and it's also excellent. So thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. And I'll leave this up so that you can chat to Janet. I'm going to leave us off YouTube, and we'll just have a lovely chat.